From sunny St Leonards on the south coast of the UK, this is the Keto Woman Podcast, brought to you by me, Daisy Brackenhall. Hello Keto Lovelies, and welcome to episode number 197. This week I'm joined by Iranda Wickramasinghe. I've caught Iranda on a few podcasts, including Dan Greaves' podcast, and also in his Facebook group. I've seen Iranda posting and commenting and thought he sounded like a really interesting guy. So when I saw his post the other day, that was a reaction to a statement he came across saying that you couldn't work out and lift weights fasted. And he, of course, wanted to prove them wrong, so he put up a video of him doing just that. I think he'd been fasted for a couple of days or something. Anyway, you know me, I like that kind of attitude. So I got in touch with him and asked him if he'd like to come on and have a conversation with me on the podcast. He's a really interesting guy. He's an ambassador for the Public Health Collaboration in the UK. You might have heard me mention it, and there have been a few episodes that I've done in the past when I attended a couple of the conferences. He describes himself as a passionate patient advocate for anyone suffering from type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes or obesity. And he maintains that it's possible to put all of these conditions into remission through simple and manageable lifestyle changes so that they can feel happier and healthier and live a life of abundance. Before we get started on the interview, I'd like to give a quick shout out and a huge thank you to Megan and April, who are the latest people to support me through my Patreon account and join the very special Daisy's Lovelies Facebook group. It's thanks to them and the rest of my patrons that I can continue putting this podcast out every week. And I really do appreciate the support. So a very big thank you to Megan and April. What else has been going on here? Well, I'm not in a very good mood when it comes to swimming in the sea because it's been very, very windy weather here and the waves have just been too big and scary for me to go in. The problem really is the getting in and out bit. Because the waves smash so hard, it's really difficult, and this has already happened to me, so I'm very wary not to get slammed into the shingle. The other problem is that good old Southern Water have had 2 burst pipes in a week, so there is sewage everywhere just up the coast. Apparently they've got tankers coming in round the clock to clear it up, but it sounds like a big old disgusting mess. So the beach where it happened is shut, but I think the advice is going to be that swimming is not a good idea for all the local beaches. So by the time I get to swim again, it's probably going to have been best part of a week since I've been in. And you all know how much I rely on it for my mood, so I'm feeling pretty grumpy about it. Hopefully things will change quicker than is predicted and I'll be able to go in over the weekend. We shall see. Rocket is still having problems with his anxiety, but he is starting to show signs of getting better. I'm absolutely convinced now that the problem was one of a couple of compounding factors. He's always had an issue with flies. I imagine that somewhere in his past he's been maybe plagued by flies, stung by horseflies or wasps or something like that. But he's always been really scared of them and snaps at them and just generally gets really anxious when they're around. And of course in the summer it's impossible to avoid them really. They're everywhere. I'm doing all I can to try and stop them coming in the house, but invariably 1 or 2 always manage to sneak in. I think I mentioned before, he's mostly been living under the bed. He's got a safe place there where he can always run to. But he's getting better at coming out in the evenings, and he has started coming on walks again, which is great. He's on calming herbal tablets from the vet. I'm not sure how much they are helping. It's really difficult to tell sometimes, isn't it, when there isn't an immediate significant impact whether they're really helping or not. And the only way to tell is if I stopped giving them to him, and I'm not prepared to do that. The other thing I've been trying him with is CBD oil. Again, I'm not sure if it's helping or not, but I think it possibly is. And whatever the case, he really likes the taste of it, and it's no trouble getting him to take a few drops of that in the morning and the evening. I did speak to a very wonderful chap called Brian Stanton, who has a business called Love Canine. He's a dog trainer and a behaviourist, and he was recommended to me by a friend. Anyway, I gave him a call and had a really interesting and useful chat with him. The good news is that pretty well everything I'm doing was spot on, and he was impressed with how in tune I am with my dogs. It's something I pride myself on, so I was really happy to hear that. But he did tell me a couple of things that could be improved, and one was to be walking him with the lead attached to his collar and not harness. I'd actually been advised by the rescue place where I adopted him, and Amy as well actually said the same thing, that they were better with a harness or possibly to double lead. They had me double leading him to start with, so a lead on his harness and one on his collar as well. And I had just been going with the harness because I've never really had an issue with any of my dogs pulling, and so it just seemed the best way to go. But he explained to me that what is happening with an anxious dog is that not having that control with the lead on their collar increases their anxiety. I think it's really along the lines of having that slight pressure on the collar, having to react to me, holding him on his lead makes him feel safe. That having his neck free was just increasing his stress levels. And so I think it's a case of relinquishing control, basically, and allowing me to be the one who looks after him and make things safe for him. So I found that fascinating because I really just hadn't known about that angle at all. He also recommended that I get him a Thunder shirt, which I've done, and he's wearing it at the moment actually, and he seems to quite like it. This evening was the first time that he's eaten in his usual spot in the kitchen rather than under the bed. Maybe that's a coincidence, I don't know, or maybe he's feeling a bit more secure with his Thunder shirt on. Anyway, the idea is that he just gets used to wearing it around the house when he's not feeling stressed, and then I can start employing it at times when he's likely to be moving towards an anxious state. He talked to me about what he calls the colours of the mind for dogs and explained a traffic light system that goes from green when everything is great through varying shades of amber and into a red state where they basically just kind of lose their mind because they're really, really anxious and fearful or whatever it is, very, very heightened emotions. And the idea, of course, is always to try and react and stop them getting to that red place, is to put strategies and tactics into place when they start heading into the amber zone. And so just to be really in tune with their moods and trying to react just to stop them getting to that anxious place. So anyway, that's only just a few details of what he shared with me. And I don't know if he works with people all over the world. I don't see why not, because we just spoke on the phone. We didn't meet in person. I will put his details in the show notes, but you can find him if you look on Facebook for Love K9, and that's K and the number 9. And his name is Brian Stanton. And if you are having trouble with any of your dogs, I'd really recommend having a chat with him if you can. He certainly helped reassure me and give me some extra things that I could be doing to help Rocket. So I'm really confident now that sooner or later Rocket will get back to his newfound confidence that we've been experiencing here since we moved. It's been really distressing for me to see him in such an anxious state and with his tail tucked between his legs and not wanting to come out on walks and things like that, because walking especially has just been the thing that he lives for. But slow and steady, I think, is the right course of action. Letting him get there in his own time mostly, but just challenging him a little bit. Brian said that the best thing is to keep him in that more relaxed state and feeling safe, but just to challenge him just a little bit so we can push him into this amber zone without tipping him into the losing his mind red zone. So like I say, I have every faith in him that he will come good sooner or later. It's just going to take some time and patience. What happened, I think, I went off on a tangent as I tend to do. He compounded this problem that he has with flies with slicing almost all the way through one of the carpal pads on his front legs, also called stop pads. They're that pad that's a bit higher up, sort of in the place where our wrists are. And they're used a lot for these kind of dogs as something to help them stop when they're running. And I have no idea how it happened. I didn't see or hear it happen. You'd think I'd have heard him yelp. And there must have been a lot of blood somewhere, but I didn't see any blood either. The only reason I knew it had happened was because he was licking it constantly. But what makes me almost certain that these two things coincided to create this anxious state is that now almost every time he sees a fly and gets a little bit stressed and anxious about it, he also goes to lick that carpal pad. So I'm pretty convinced that the two things combined in his mind and just compounded that anxiety. Poor old boy, he's my love, and it's been so hard to see. It's one of those times when you just want to be able to talk to them in their own language and explain that everything's going to be okay. But I think we're at that point in our relationship where he does see me as his safe place. And I hope anyway, that he realizes that I will be able to make it okay in the end. I will keep you updated. But it was great anyway to learn some new things about dog psychology. Anyway, here I am rambling on again, and Iranda's interview does run a little bit long, so this is going to be a really long episode overall. I hope you enjoy going back to the old format of an informal chat. I certainly enjoyed chatting with Iranda, so I hope you do too. Welcome, Iranda, to the Keto Woman podcast. How are you doing today?
Really good. Thanks so much, Daisy. This is a real honor because I've been a huge fan of your podcast for a long time.
Well, that's very lovely to hear. I do forget sometimes how long I've been doing this. It's quite a while now. We're approaching 4 years, I think.
Wow. And I think as of today, I can officially call myself an odd man.
Yes. It's funny, of course, you'll get that. Americans don't get the odd part of that. Mm-hmm. Although I am changing. I've changed the introduction, so it's not there any longer, actually. But
okay.
Yes, they think odd as in odd peculiar rather than odd as in, just a few, not very many.
Just a few, yeah.
But yes, I quite like that. I quite like the confusion. So, Iranda, this podcast is all about you and your story. So why don't you take it away and tell me about you?
Yeah. So I guess up front, I'd just like to say, if anybody listening listens to nothing else, I think the most important thing I'd like to say up front is that type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, obesity can all be reversed or put into remission through simple and manageable lifestyle changes. Mm-hmm. And now I'll kind of launch into my story. So I'm Sri Lankan. So I was born in Sri Lanka, beautiful country. And as a child, my parents fed us without really knowing that much about nutrition, which is a little bit ironic because they're both doctors. And you'd expect doctors to know a little bit about nutrition.
Well, I don't know, actually. Anyone who knows about the training knows that actually it's a very limited part of the training, isn't it?
Very limited, exactly. So I'd say I was always a chubby child because there was always sweets and kind of biscuits and chocolates and, white bread with margarine and sugar, those kinds of things going on. So I was always a chubby child. Until the age of about 11, when I discovered the cadets and I got fit for the first time in my life. And that stood me in good stead for the rest of my life, actually, because fitness turned into a bit of a habit. So I had periods of when I was chubby, when I wasn't chubby. And certainly when I got through to my 20s, I started to put on quite a bit of weight, especially when my exercise went down. And that's when I first started calorie restricting, the good old calories in, calories out.
Right. Well, I guess you were doing the move more. You couldn't move much more, so there wasn't much left to do from the typical advice.
Exactly. So I kind of vividly remember this because I was with a running club with all these fit, thin people, and I was keeping up, in terms of doing 35, 40 miles of running a week, but I was still a bit heavy, and I thought, what am I doing wrong? And I resorted to meal replacement shakes. And one clear memory I have is I was sneakily having my second shake of the day. And one of my running mates at the running club said, are you on Slim Fast shakes or something? And and then they kind of outed me to the whole club, and they thought it was hilarious. But, I kind of took it in good grace, and I owned it, instead of being embarrassed about it. But I did think at the time that it's really strange that there's all these people around me who seem to stay fit and healthy and slim with no apparent effort. And they seem to be eating similar things to what I'm eating, but I'm struggling. And, that kind of started my yo-yo dieting, if you like. So periods of being fit and slim, followed by periods of being overweight. And the weight gradually crept up until I became obese and pre-diabetic. The real shocker was Friday, the 23rd of August, 2019.
Precise.
Yeah. So that's when I got the results for what's called a HbA1c, which I know a lot about now. I didn't know so much about what that means at the time, but I got told I was pre-diabetic and that I was obese. And at the time, I just got a sheet of A4 paper, which had some food ideas on it, and away you go, lose some weight, and this will all go away. As if losing weight is a straightforward thing to do, and as if keeping the weight off is a straightforward thing to do. So off I went, a little bit disheartened, because it's not as if I hadn't been trying to maintain a healthy weight. Well, 13 marathons, I think that qualifies as trying quite hard, personally. And, umpteen number of half marathons, 10Ks, gym workouts. I was certainly doing the move more part of it. But fortunately for me, several things happened. So I discovered the PHC, the Public Health Collaboration, especially Dr. David Unwin and his wife, Dr. Jen Unwin, who is a clinical psychologist. And what really resonated for me is their message of hope, especially Jen Unwin, who said, you need positive things to look forward to motivate you, not the fear.
That's right.
Not the fear of I'm going to be ill, because there's lots to be scared about with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. Pre-diabetes, the scary thing about that is your body's losing the ability to control your own blood sugar, and left unchecked, if your default lifestyle doesn't change, that inevitably leads to type 2 diabetes. And then all of the complication that comes with, you can go blind. So that's kind of the microvascular damage that you can get with type 2 diabetes. You can have a stroke, you can have a heart attack, you can get nerve damage to your feet, which means that if you hurt your feet, you don't feel it, and that kind of gets infected and gangrenous, and eventually you could have, your feet amputated. So there's lots to be scared about. But what really resonated for me with the message from Dr. Jen Unwin and Dr. David Unwin was that message of hope, saying, why are you doing this? What are the positive things that you want? And I knew the answer to that when I thought about it, because at the time, my son was very young, only a few months old, and I knew that I wanted to have a healthy, vibrant, happy life, and to be the kind of father that he could look up to and has the energy to play with him. And similarly, I wanted my wife to have a healthy, happy husband, the kind of person that she married, as opposed to this tired, overweight, hangry person that I'd become. And I also discovered Dr. Jason Fung and Megan Ramos. And again, I found this newfangled thing called intermittent fasting, which I since found out is not newfangled at all. It's very ancient and actually brought me right back to my roots, because I'm a Buddhist.
Yes.
In terms of, I'm a Buddhist, and Buddhists have been practicing intermittent fasting for over 2,500 years. And the funny thing is, I've already done intermittent fasting as part of a 10-day retreat for Vipassana meditation, but I didn't really put two and two together that the intermittent fasting helps with the meditation. Through inducing a mild state of ketosis, those magical things called ketones that give you so many benefits, really, including anti-inflammation. So I thought, what have I got to lose? So let's try this new thing called low carb. Let's try this new thing called intermittent fasting and see how I go. And, I made lots of mistakes at the beginning. And fortunately for me, I saw some very promising, encouraging early results, which kind of gave me a lot of hope, which gave me a lot of comfort, really. And within 3 months, all of the excess weight was gone.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah, it's really quick. 3 months, that's all it took. And I kind of intentionally held myself back. I said, I'm not going to go to the GP practice because the HbA1c, my understanding is that it's a 3-month average of the blood sugar. So I thought, okay, so now that I've lost the weight, I need to maintain this for another 3 months, and then I'll have the test. And, I got the results end of January 2020 and clean bill of health. The nurse did a bit of a double take because she looked at me, she looked at the screen, then she looked back at me, and she looked back at the screen, and she just couldn't reconcile. It was the same nurse that saw me and did the original blood test, and she just couldn't reconcile what she was seeing on the screen in terms of recorded clinical results only, back in August compared to what she was seeing in January.
And probably also, I imagine, and I am making assumptions here, but you said they handed you a sheet of paper. Now, I'm sure they've handed many other people sheets of paper and have seen many other people 6 months later.
Yeah.
And they haven't had quite the results that you did.
No, not at all, because I ignored the piece of paper.
Exactly.
Yeah. I actually did something that worked.
Yes, exactly. You mentioned that you made several mistakes at the beginning. I'd be interested to hear what those were, or what you now think of as mistakes. Presumably you didn't at the time.
So, on Saturday, the 24th of August, 2019, I still was clueless. I didn't know what to do. So I thought I'd just go back to what I normally do, which is calorie restricting. And then I thought, at least once in every day, I want to feel like I've had a meal. I want to feel full. And I was really scared that I wouldn't be able to sleep. So I kind of went into intermittent fasting by accident almost, because I did what's called OMAD, or 1 meal a day. I thought, I don't want to go to bed hungry, so I'm going to have some salad and lean protein, very little fat, at the end of the day, enough to keep me full, but it means I'm not eating throughout the rest of the day, just having water or black coffee. So I kind of stumbled into intermittent fasting by mistake. I guess the mistake I made was thinking about it in terms of calories rather than focusing on my satiety. So certainly the groups I run now, I tell people to focus on the satiety first. Have a really good kind of breakfast, which is very nutrient dense. If you're feeling hungry before lunchtime, it probably means you're not eating the right things and not enough at breakfast time. Do the same for lunchtime and do the same for dinner, and see how you get on with that. And eventually you'll get to the stage where you wake up in the morning and you think, I'm not actually very hungry. And then you stop eating because you don't feel hungry, which is a lot kinder to yourself than muscling it through the hunger, which is what I did.
Right.
I put myself under an enormous amount of stress, really, in those first few months. And looking back, it was desperation, really. And I also read a study by Professor Roy Taylor. He's an amazing person, actually. 10 years ago, he's really the first person that did what's called a randomized controlled trial, which is considered very high quality evidence to prove that you actually could put type 2 diabetes into remission. Now, he did it through meal replacement shakes. I think it was 800 calories a day.
I was going to say low calorie, 800 comes to mind.
Low calorie. So that's where I got my idea from at the beginning, in terms of I need to really cut down my calories.
Well, ultimately, it is a way, there's more than one way of reversing type 2 diabetes, and a very low calorie diet is one of them. It's just not a very pleasant one.
No, it's not pleasant. And I guess it begs the question as well. What do you do after the 10 or 12 weeks of those low calorie meal replacement shakes? What do you eat for the rest of your life? Because the way that I could advise people now as part of the PHC, or the Public Health Collaboration, is focus on the satiety first, and focus on the glycemic control first, so your variability in blood sugar. Focus on that first. And once you get to the point when you're no longer feeling very hungry, try going down to 2 meals a day because you don't feel like eating, which is different to kind of that real acute hunger that you can get when you're addicted to carbohydrates. Because I remember what that felt like. And, on the way home from work, I was almost shaking with hunger sometimes. And my wife got used to the fact that I was a different person to before a meal compared to after a meal, which shouldn't be the case. I should always be the same person.
Yes, it's almost similar to somebody who reacts that way to alcohol. When you describe some people who are completely different when they've had a drink, it's a similar kind of thing, and sort of highlights how much control it can have over your system. I think a lot of people who adopt a low carb ketogenic way of eating naturally fall into fasting of some kind, whether that's just not eating for longer every day and having a shorter eating window, or going into intermittent fasting and spending a whole day not eating, or maybe even multiple days. I think it's so much better known, and as you mentioned, it's an ancient practice, but it's so much better known and commonly talked about now. I think a lot more people do know about it, but it's just something that a lot of people just do by accident, and then they start reading about it and and finding out why they feel like that and why they naturally don't want to eat or do this thing called fasting. Because it sounds a bit scary. I know when I've discussed it with friends of mine, and they start thinking along the lines of, I'm starving myself. How can you not eat for so long? I feel a bit faint if I don't eat for very long. Well, yes, there's a reason for that.
There's a reason for that. And because I felt like that at the beginning, because the first time I did a fast, I did feel very kind of lethargic and low in energy, because I hadn't really given my body enough time to adapt to the low carb way of eating, becoming fat adapted. So I kind of put myself in a position where my body didn't have any energy, because I wasn't giving my body the carbs, and my body wasn't really used to metabolizing the fat and, or getting into ketosis efficiently. So I was definitely in an energy deficit in terms of what my body was experiencing. And my wife will tell you, I think we had a really young son at the time. And I think the first extended fast I did it over a weekend, because I didn't want to be at work when I did that. And I think I went back to bed at about 10 in the morning, because I was just feeling so drained, really. Whereas now I can do a 3 to 5 day fast, no problem, and do a workout and do some heavy lifting, do my work, whatever that I need to do it, and it doesn't really faze me.
Yes, I think I watched a video of yours. The question was, can I work out fasted or lift weights fasted or something like that? And you proceeded to do just that. So you're a big fan of running and marathons in particular. You must, I would imagine anyway, have noticed quite a difference in that. Something I hear the most often with people who do any kind of endurance sport is that the recovery is so much better. and also in general the performance. There's that adjustment period where it can feel really difficult, apparently, but further on, especially with more endurance sports, it's much easier to do when you're running on fat. You don't hit the wall or bonk, as Americans call it, when you get to a certain point, because you're running on a different fuel, basically.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one, because when I first went back, this was after my initial very, very rapid kind of fat loss and weight loss, I found myself quite slow. So I think my muscles at that point hadn't really fully adapted, because I kind of intentionally didn't exercise very much while I was in that weight loss phase. Other than walking, I didn't really do much exercise. So when I went back to the running club and started running, I started at the back of the pack. But the thing is, I kind of got fitter very, very quickly. And within weeks, I could noticeably see an improvement. And it got to the point where, I could do quite a hilly run for about 12, 13K 2 days into a fast. No problem.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. Anyone who knows about running knows about running marathons in particular. My brother's a keen runner and has done several marathons, and he talks about the stations that have the gels and all the things that keep you going, and when he hits the wall and all these things, and how important it is to fuel yourself in the right way at a certain time before the race, and then the same afterwards for recovery, and blah blah blah. So to imagine doing that when you haven't eaten for 2 days.
2 days,
and then you run a marathon fasted. I mean, that sounds insane when, in that context. But it's exciting that you can do that.
Yeah. I mean, the big person for this is Professor Tim Noakes. As you know, he literally wrote the book and symbolically...
And then ripped the pages up. I love that. That's what I always think about. I have the utmost respect for anybody who will say, I got it wrong.
Yeah.
Because we all get things wrong, don't we?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So he's kind of my ultimate idea of a scientist, somebody who looks at the evidence and, if the evidence goes against their own personal belief or bias, they put that aside and they say, as you said, I got it wrong. Got it wrong. And they're happy about getting it wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And something that he also talks about, that to really have a strong conviction about something, whatever it is, but let's talk about a way of eating, that the best way is to try and disprove the theory, to try and knock it down, rather than trying to just find evidence to support it, because you'll always be able to do that.
Yes.
But try and pull it apart, try and, do the opposite. And if you can't do that, then it's strong.
Yeah, absolutely. The sort of the classic kind of black swan kind of scenario, isn't it? Because you have a theory that says all swans are white, and then you only need one black swan to disprove it. You don't need loads, you just need one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the exciting things that you've gone on to do. I find this so often with my guests, that they've seen such a dramatic change in their own health, and it's developed into such a passion that they want to share it with other people. Some of them build businesses, all sorts of things. But I know you've gone on to do lots of exciting things. Perhaps you could tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the latest very exciting thing I've done is Sam Feltham, amazing person who is the founder and director of the Public Health Collaboration, which is a UK charity. Sam came up with this idea that we could help GPs in primary care in practice with their type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetic patients. We've got this amazing new initiative, which is a pilot at this stage, called the Lifestyle Club. So that's myself and 3 other health coaches. Give them a quick shout out if I may.
Definitely.
So Helen Gowers, then there's Heather Temple Marsh and John Furness and myself. So between us, we're working with across 13 sites, so 13 practices, and nearly 100 patients who are all type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic, doing a structured course in terms of finding individualized solutions to help them ideally reduce medications, at least for some of them, try and achieve full type 2 diabetes remission, drug-free diabetes remission, which will be an amazing thing to do. So fingers crossed for that. Some really early encouraging signs. We're in week 6 at the moment of a 12-week program. So it's kind of a 6-week program followed by a gap and then a follow-up at the end of the 12 weeks. So fingers crossed, in September, we'll have some really exciting and encouraging things to report.
That sounds fantastic. So presumably you take them through all sorts of different lifestyle changes, not just diet, presumably.
Absolutely. We talk about the importance of sleep, and we talk about the importance of movement in terms of, so a lot of people think, okay, I need to go to the gym or I need to kind of run, whereas kind of bring it right back to kind of, okay, so how would you feel about walking in the morning? First thing in the morning, just a relaxing walk as far as you can manage, even if it's 5 minutes. And, how do you feel about going for a walk after a meal? And did you know that just the act of walking after a meal can really help with your blood sugar control? And what's more, you might even enjoy it. You might even find it relaxing, and that'll bring down your stress levels. And, we talk about things like meditation. Just simple strategies like, having an app on your phone, like sort of Headspace or Calm, both of which I use myself. And, the impact that cortisol and the stress hormone cortisol has on blood sugar and health overall. So it's much more than just diet. And diet does play a huge part in the work that we do. And we also talk about food addiction, which is very under-recognized, because the funny thing is people do not have an issue with admitting that some people find gambling addictive, even though there's no substance involved. So there's no substance involved, but people recognize the fact that some people really have a problem and it's an addiction. Whereas a lot of people really resist the idea that food addiction is real. And I mean, this is something that Jen Unwin talks about quite a lot, is that lack of recognition actually deprives people of resources. Because if you don't recognize something as a problem, you don't form a policy or allocate resources to try and help people.
And you also struggle with something like that. If it's not commonly known, it's not commonly named, you feel very alone.
Yeah.
Once something like that becomes a shared experience, I remember the presentation she did at one of the PHC conferences with Charlotte Summers, I believe it was, when they were talking about addiction, and it was an audience participation event, and they had people stand up answering different questions. And that was to do with, we found out afterwards that it was to do with sugar addiction, carb addiction. But just doing that and seeing other people standing up with you, seeing other people sharing in that experience, it takes some of the weight off, doesn't it? When you know that you're not alone, there are other people that suffer with it. It's not your fault. And there are strategies that you can put in place to actually help deal with it and manage it.
Yeah. And it kind of highlights the fact that processed foods are designed to be addictive, because it says it on the packet. So Pringles, for example, once you pop, you can't stop. It actually is an advertising slogan. So there's explicit acknowledgement that certain people will struggle not to overeat those things. And there's an enormous amount of money that have been spent to formulate products, and they even tailor it specifically to certain sort of areas of the world or markets. So, kind of Cadbury's chocolate will taste different in America than it will here. So much so that it's not uncommon for people who live in the States to ask people that visit them to bring proper chocolate from the UK, because they want that British taste that they grew up with, as opposed to the taste that's tailored over in America. And a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, I visited in New Zealand, And of all the things that I could have taken over, he asked for a particular brand of crisps. So half of one of our big suitcases was full of packets of crisps.
You got to tell me which crisps.
Pom Bears.
Oh, really?
Pom Bears. So
that must have been a childhood thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it was mostly for his daughters, actually. So I think their favorite crisps were Pom Bears. He probably quite likes them himself, but so a whole lot of Pom Bears in this massive suitcase. So
yes, my nephews quite like Pom Bears.
Yeah.
How funny.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's incredible. And like you say, they work very hard on that unholy trinity, I like to call it, of salt, fat and sugar. And a lot of effort has gone in to get the balance just right. I can remember watching a program about it, and they were talking about Pringles. They were also talking about Snickers, which is a perfect example of getting that balance just right. A little bit of salt, lots of sugar, the fat, and you get the balance just right, and it's almost impossible to stop eating it.
Absolutely. And finally, we're getting closer to having this recognized as well, because there's a scientist called Kevin Hall that did a small study, but it was a randomized control study. I think it was something like 20 people over a month. They matched the sugar, they matched the salt and the fat, and they matched the amount of fiber as well. And they tried whole foods versus ultra-processed foods. I think the ultra-processed arm of the group was, I think, up to 80% ultra-processed foods. And I think they did it as they randomized it so that half of the people started off on the UPF or ultra-processed food diet, half of the people started on the whole food diets, and then halfway through they swapped over. So they even kind of tested the same person with both diets. And they found that even if you match the salt content, the sugar content, and the fat content, and the fiber content, if you eat ultra-processed foods, you will eat more. Not only will you eat more, you'll feel more hungry, and you'll absorb more of those calories, and you'll gain more weight. And, I think recently, again, I don't know if you've seen it, but doctors Chris Van Tulleken and Zand Van Tulleken, they're doing this amazing podcast series.
Yes, it's great,
at the moment. It's amazing. I mean, they're really shining a light on the fact that ultra-processed foods are a real threat to not only our health, but the future health of our children. Yeah, I think it's called a thorough examination.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's very good. It's very touching. They really dig into the difference between them, and they have their other brother on there as well sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
And they really dig into the different perspective on food and the different grip it has on the two of them, and it's quite distinct, isn't it?
I mean, what's fascinating about their case is that they're genetically identical, yet their state of health is so different, and their relationship to food is so different. It's a really touching series, as you said, and it's an important series, I think, because it talks about the fact that food can be addictive to certain people, or ultra-processed foods especially can be addictive to certain people. And it's really important.
It's interesting what you mentioned also about movement and exercise. I mean, fairly vigorous exercise has obviously been part of your life for a long time. And it sounds like it mitigated your weight gain and probably how early you became pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't have had that in your life. I should imagine it staved it off for a lot longer.
Yeah.
But the importance of just moving, I don't know if you remember watching, and I forget the name of the program. It was on ITV, and they put type 2 diabetics in a house. They locked them in the house, and they put them on these shakes.
Okay.
But the really interesting thing that came out of it for me was that one exercise that they got them to do was during the time they were awake, every hour on the hour, they had to get up and move for 5 minutes.
Right.
And it could be any kind of movement. It could just be a gentle walk around the house, chatting with the other residents. It could be doing some star jumps. It could be doing anything. But they had to get up and move. And they tested their fasting blood sugar, I think it was,
Okay.
before they did this.
Yeah.
And then the day after they'd done this. And I can't remember the difference in points, but it was significant. Really significant,
Yeah.
for actually quite a small amount of effort. So
Uh-huh.
it just goes to show, like you were saying, you haven't got to run a marathon. You haven't got to start running even. Some fairly gentle walking to start with, which, you know, most people can manage that, even if it's not for very long. Does make a big difference.
Huge difference. And walking is when I most often listen to podcasts, including your podcast. You know, and you can listen to a podcast, you can listen to music, you can listen to an audiobook, or you can just walk and take in your surroundings. And personally, I find it really helps me with my kind of relaxation.
Yes, me too. And it certainly impacts my mental health. I think it's very important also to be outside. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Being in the fresh air, looking at things around you. Yeah. That makes a big difference too.
And sunlight makes a huge difference, especially in the morning, you know, resetting your circadian rhythm and getting that kind of sunlight on your skin and, you know, the vitamin D that you get from that. You know, especially me being South Asian, I need far more sunlight to get the same amount of vitamin D. So it's something I'm really conscious of. I try and get out as much as I can in the sun in the summer months.
And do you think that maybe had an impact with your type 2 diabetes? Because I know that's something that is often spoken about, that people in Asian countries are more susceptible to type 2 diabetes when they're eating a heavy carbohydrate diet.
That's an interesting point, actually. So I think there probably is some sort of impact in terms of the vitamin D angle for South Asians living here who develop type 2 diabetes. I think it's mainly to do with diet, but yeah, I'm not sure if there's been a study on that, actually. I'd be interested to know the answer myself. Yeah.
It would just be interesting, you know, when you're comparing yourself to others, like you were talking about in your running group. And I can remember at school, well, how come I'm eating pretty well the same as my friends and they're really lean and I'm overweight? How does that work? That doesn't seem fair to me. And that, you know, there can be all sorts of different factors. But I was just wondering if potentially that might have been one of them for you.
Yeah, and there is that sense of unfairness, isn't there? I think, because, you know, my wife, for example, has been lean all her life, slim all her life. She eats everything. She eats whatever she likes. And I think throughout her adult life, she has been the same dress size. It's never changed. You know, she went through pregnancy. She didn't really put on that much weight. And she lost the weight really quickly and started to complain that all the clothes were too big. And it just looks so effortless. Also, she does this amazing thing, which for me looks like she's walking on water. Is like, that can be a packet of chocolate digestives or some chocolate lying in plain sight. And she'll either ignore it, or if she fancies one, she'll have one and then she'll forget about it. Whereas for somebody like me, who's a food addict, I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing that thing's in the house. I just have to eat it. Just
it's
for
calling,
my peace,
isn't it? You can hear it.
just for my peace of mind, I'll just have to eat it or throw it away or do something. Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting. My father's like that. He's basically been the same size all his adult life. But interestingly, though, he has started to have issues with blood sugar.
Okay.
And those levels creeping up, even though he's very lean. But he's spoken to me about it and we've made some adjustments to his diet. He was a vegetarian for many years and has lived in Thailand for many decades, is actually Thai now. But, you know, was eating quite a lot of things like rice. But basically you'd look at his diet and say it was a pretty healthy diet. But we had to work on just manipulating that diet a bit, getting some more fats in. His HDL, for example, was very low.
Right.
His blood sugar was starting to get very high.
Right.
So really starting to cut some of the carbohydrate things down. He used to like eating a lot of fruit and eating it frequently.
Right.
So he's cut that down and cut the frequency down.
Yeah.
He's always been very good about exercise. He's one of these people who, if he's told something's a good idea for his health, he'll just decide to do it and he'll do it. So he was told for his cholesterol levels that exercise would be a good idea. So he started exercising the next day, and that was it. He doesn't have a problem with motivation. He's very good at that. But yes, he's made some changes. One of the most significant ones, actually, and he realised this, that he didn't feel like he was getting enough protein.
Right.
So actually now he does eat fish. So
Okay.
he prefers, if he could, he would just eat vegetables.
Eat vegetables, right.
He eats some fish as well now. And his numbers have improved. They weren't getting dangerously high, but they were just starting to creep up. So he's pulled those back.
Brilliant.
But yes, you can't necessarily tell from the outside package what's going on inside, can you?
Yeah. Your dad, how you're describing him, reminds me of a film I saw that Ivor Cummins put together called Extra Time.
Oh, I haven't watched that, but I know the one you mean. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he revisits kind of a winning kind of Gaelic football team.
That's right.
And one of the players, who was really lean, looks very buff and ripped still, turns out had almost a complete blockage in one of the major arteries that supplied his heart. And, he was on the standard kind of low fat, high carb kind of diet, and very motivated individual. So it sounds like your dad in the sense of like, he asked, okay, what should I do? He implemented what was advised, which was, okay, so let's kind of moderate your carbohydrates. Let's get some more protein and healthy fats, and, try and put you on a low carb diet. And he, not only did he arrest the atherosclerosis or that disease process, he actually, measurably reversed some of it. So again, a lot of people, if they knew what to do, they'd be doing it. And that's the tragedy, really, because, people do the best that they can based on the information that they have now. And it's not a lack of not wanting to be healthy. It's not a matter of being hedonistic. It's not a matter of lacking willpower, which is what a lot of people think.
Yes, it's just giving them that option. When we're focusing on type 2 diabetes, but it could be for any number of things. And they're given that diagnosis and they're given some of the options for how to deal with it.
Yeah.
It is, like you say, it's a tragedy not to be given these lifestyle changes as an option.
Yeah.
Might choose not to do them, of course.
Yeah, of course.
They need to know about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the key word you use there is option. Absolutely. It's about having these lifestyle changes as an option alongside everything else, including kind of very low calorie diets and things like that. Because for some people, that might be the better thing to do. Yeah.
And for some people, sadly, I had this conversation with somebody I used to know in France. He was a type 2 diabetic, and there were various problems that were getting worse, things like neuropathy, and he'd been in hospital for a few things. And it got to the point where he started to take insulin.
Right.
And I had a conversation with him about that and said, especially as you've only just started, there are things that you could do if you would be interested in talking about them that maybe would mean that you could stop taking it again and improve your health. And, we talked a bit about what that would entail.
Okay.
And he said, I would rather... Bread was the thing that came up. He was, he's a Frenchman. Baguette's very important. But I would rather eat these things and cover it with the insulin injection. And that's ultimately, that's his choice.
Yeah.
It was sad for me.
Yeah.
But it's his choice, and he has a right to make whatever choice he wants to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a hard thing for me as well, actually, because, somebody very close to me is pre-diabetic. And to be honest, I approached it completely the wrong way, because when I first talked to them, I was one of these really annoying people at the very start when you think you know everything and you think you're always the right way.
Oh, yeah.
You think you know everything. You think you're always the right way. It's low carb and intermittent fasting or nothing. Everything else, is rubbish. So I was in that. So this was really early on, within the first 2 months of, my lifestyle change. I spoke to this person, but obviously nobody likes speaking to a zealot.
No.
And nobody likes speaking to a zealot. And it's all down to, thing is, what I should have done is just focus on myself, and they would have come to me themselves without any prompting and said, "Oh, you look good." It's like, what have you been doing? What's different? And that would have been a much more positive conversation where I could have just gently kind of said, okay, so, this is something I've tried for myself. I've seen some really good results, as you can see. The blood tests back it up as well, because, all my health markers have got better. Here are some resources. Here's some books I've read. Have a look at it yourself. And if you've got any questions, I'm happy to talk anytime. That's the approach I wish I'd taken, knowing what I'd known now. But unfortunately, I kind of went in like a bull in a china shop, and it's actually stopped my ability to talk to that person about things that could help them, which I'm quite sad about. But now I know better. So these days I'm very, very subtle in terms of, I kind of phrase things in terms of, this is what I do. This suits me. This makes me happy. This makes me feel good. And I kind of always bring it back to tailoring it to myself. And not really saying that everybody should be doing the same thing. And again, with the patient groups that we work with, we very much try and tell them, we're never going to tell you what to do. We'll give you information and tools, and we'll answer questions honestly. But it's all down to what you want, what works for you personally in your life. And we had some really interesting conversations, like, I have been told by some of my patients, that some of the patients in my group, that I can't give up bread, or I can't give up rice, or things like that. And then my approach to that now is, okay, let's think about that. So it's really interesting that you used words like can't and I can't and I need. Let's think about that. So if you were to tell me that you can't levitate, I would believe you, because nobody can do that. But let's think about, in the context of food, what you're really saying when you say I can't give up bread is, I don't want to. And if you don't want to right now, that's fine. That's your choice. We've talked about all of the things that we could do. And at this stage in your journey, if you feel like you don't want to give up bread or want to give up rice, let's just think about reducing the amount to get your carb count down. So you really have to, I think, I've learned this hard way, you've got to meet people where they are now.
That's it. You've got to meet them where they're at. You've got to start where they are.
Yeah.
And not try and force them. And Jen Unwin talks about this, doesn't she? Talks about taking someone from where they are through the next steps, and they can be tiny little steps. They're not your steps. They're steps that they suggest, steps that are achievable for them. And yes, giving up bread might seem like just a step that seems too far.
Too far, yeah.
But cutting down the amount or cutting down the frequency, even if it's just a small amount.
Yeah.
I mean, I've spoken to people about giving up sugar in their coffee. That just seems too hard. But then you say, well, okay, so what about, say they have a spoonful of sugar in their coffee. Well, how about you just take a little bit of that off in your spoonful tomorrow?
Yeah.
And a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And that's sort of how I stopped taking sugar in my coffee, and I took it down a bit by bit. And so I hardly noticed until there were just literally a few grains. And that jump actually from a few grains to nothing was fairly significant in taste. But I was at a point when I got to those few grains that I felt able to make that leap. But I couldn't go from a whole spoonful to nothing straight away.
Yeah.
So there are ways it can be done, as you say, if you want to. And that's where the why becomes really important, doesn't it? That has to become more significant than the desire for whatever the food is.
Absolutely. Because all of the positive things that you want for yourself in terms of, you know, just feeling better, like when you wake up, feeling rested and feeling like you're ready for the day, having the energy to keep up with your child, you know, and just having the energy to get more out of life, being able to wear clothes that you like, you know, and looking at yourself in the mirror and thinking, oh, I don't look as tired anymore. I don't have the bags under my eyes. It looks like I've lost some weight. I mean, that is real health, not a number on the scales, but how your clothes fit and how you look in the mirror matters more than a number on the scales, because nobody knows what the number on your scales is except you. But when you look at yourself or when other people see you, they can see that your skin looks better. You don't have bags underneath your eyes and you're wearing different clothes, and people start to notice, and it becomes that kind of virtuous cycle, or kind of, you know, this is the grin method that Jen Unwin talks about, the noticing part. What are you noticing about yourself in terms of what are the positive differences that you're noticing? How do you feel in the morning when you wake up? And, you know, a few weeks ago, you were struggling to walk 5 minutes. How do you feel now? Do you feel as tired, or do you feel that you can walk for longer? You know, and what are your energy levels like? What's your mood like? What's your mood like? Are your family members noticing that you're not quite as irritable anymore? You know, and are you more present when you're with your loved ones? Are you more present instead of thinking about the next meal? Are you able to focus on your loved ones and interacting with them and enjoying their company, as opposed to thinking, oh, there's a piece of cheesecake in the fridge. I'll just wait for everybody. Okay, let's just finish up what we're doing now, go to bed. Then you can sneak into the fridge and have that, whatever that is. Because those kinds of things happen for food addicts.
Absolutely. And of course, it's something else. If you mentioned about things like irritability, well, if your family and friends are finding you more pleasant to be around because your mood has improved, they're more likely to be supportive and to help you. You know, maybe they've been resistant to this diet change and haven't wanted to maybe not have the things in the house because you find them very difficult when they're in front of you, but they don't see why they should be deprived. However, if they start to see the benefits to you and to them, they might be more inclined to, you know, jump on board and help you out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I know a lot of people do find that side of it very difficult. I'm lucky in that respect. I live on my own, so I can clear my cupboards out and I can do whatever I like. I don't have to think about anyone else. Yeah,
actually, mixed households can be a particular sort of challenge, because certainly in the beginning, my wife and I had certain kind of practical strategies that we'd agreed on. So certain foods we agreed she'd just hide somewhere that I wouldn't find them, and I had permission, if I did find them, to throw them out immediately, no discussion. You know, go straight in the in the food recycling. I don't even have to talk about it. It just goes straight in the bin. While I have that tiny sense of self-control and preservation and presence of mind to do it. I'm a lot better now, but weirdly, sort of, we don't really have those foods in the house anymore anyway, because my wife's quite happy with how we eat now. And occasionally, if we do have certain foods in the house, it doesn't bother me as much anymore.
Yes, I think a lot of people find that they find it easier. It's that initial transition time that's particularly difficult.
Yeah.
And for some people, a friend of mine, Kim Houghton, talks about how her partner she lives with doesn't eat the same way she does. There's some overlap, of course, but he has some, high carbohydrate type treats in the house, but they have an agreement that they don't have the ones that she can't resist. So, a particular type of biscuit or a particular type of crisps, whatever it is, the ones that she just finds nigh on impossible to resist, he doesn't have those ones. But the ones she's a bit sort of, I'm not that bothered, she can have those in the cupboards and it's not a problem. But everyone has their own limits, their own boundaries. It might be I know somebody else who has a flatmate that they share their place with. She bought them a lockbox and they keep they literally keep their treats locked away from her so that she can't get them. And that works well. Yeah, so there are ways you can deal with it. And, you've spoken about being impacted by food addiction yourself.
Yeah.
How have you found that? Would you say that it's something that's been completely alleviated, or you still have issues with it?
I'd say it depends very much on how much sleep I'm getting and how stressed I am. So when I'm relaxed and things are motoring along, weeks would go by, months would go by, everything's just ticking along, no problem. As soon as there's some stress or disruption, lack of sleep, anything like that, I think for me that overeating or comfort eating tends to creep back in. Mm-hmm. And even with so-called keto foods, that can happen, especially nuts, actually, and cheese.
Oh, yes, completely.
Nuts and cheese.
Nut butters.
Exactly. So basically, I've never overeaten steak or salmon, asparagus, broccoli, eggs, all these things, meat, fish, and eggs, I just eat to satiety. Same with green vegetables, non-starchy vegetables. They're delicious. I love eating them and they're really satisfying and satiating, but I don't eat them when I'm stressed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whereas peanut butter, it could be organic peanut butter, no added sugar, almost 100% just peanuts with maybe a tiny bit of, organic palm oil or whatever in there, no sugar. And that is the type of food that I would eat for comfort when I'm stressed. When I'm having those periods, I don't have those foods in the house. Whereas in those times when everything's going fine, they can be there in plain sight and I'll just have a little bit here and there as I fancy. But same with cheese, actually. I can tend to overeat cheese sometimes.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? And this is where awareness is key, self-awareness of how you are around certain foods at different times. Like you say, it can be very different.
Yeah.
But I think that's a trick, isn't it? To think about things that you struggle not to overeat or to eat too often is the other thing. And things like peanut butter, that's a problem for me. It's very easy to just, dip your spoon in and have a bit when you're passing. Mm-hmm. But so you're eating it too often, eating it as a snack. It's not necessarily part of a meal. Yeah. And like you say, it's something you reach for when you feel that need for comfort.
Yeah. And, again, I kind of talk about this in my groups in terms of, again, this is an idea I got from Dr. Robert Sivers, the carb addiction doc. And, he always says that a snack is never a nutritional event. It is always an emotional event. Mm-hmm. And it goes right the way back to our childhood and how we were raised, whether we had parents who were too strict or too permissive. He talks about, so certain parents, they ask you to do a chore and you do the chore. And instead of saying, well done, they'd say, oh, that took you long enough. So that's the authoritarian view. Whereas other parents, they ask you to do a chore, you don't do it, and they say, oh, that's okay. So that's those two